The lights in Dr. Harrison's office buzzed like angry wasps while he delivered news that would change everything. Advanced arthritis in both knees, and your heart condition is progressing faster than we hoped, he said, his voice clinical but kind. You'll need daily medication and assistance with daily activities. My son Julian sat beside me, scrolling through his phone like he was checking stock prices instead of hearing about his mother's failing body. Behind us, my daughters Naomi and Claire whispered to each other about memory care facilities and what's best for everyone involved. I wanted to scream that I wasn't dead yet, that my mind was sharp even if my joints ached like rusty hinges. But my throat stayed tight, words trapped behind years of being dismissed and overlooked. That night, lying in my own bed in the house I'd lived in for 30 years, I heard Naomi's voice drift through the thin walls. She can't handle herself anymore, Julian. We need to be realistic about her options. My hands clenched into fists under the quilts my grandmother had sewn. I thought about her strength, her stubbornness. Watch me handle myself, I promised silently. But the very next morning, I noticed something strange about my medications. Just before you continue to watch, Feminine Revenge would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage us to keep this streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. Every morning for 3 months, I'd lined up my pill bottles on the kitchen counter, like little soldiers. Heart medication, arthritis pills, vitamins, each one carefully measured and timed according to Dr. Harrison's instructions. The routine gave me structure when everything else felt like it was crumbling. Then one evening, the bottles were missing. I searched every cabinet, every drawer, even checked the trash. Nothing. When I asked Claire about it over dinner, she shrugged without looking up from her salad. Maybe you misplaced them, Mom. You've been forgetting things lately. I knew I hadn't forgotten. My memory might not be perfect, but I remembered important things. I remembered faces, dates, the feeling of trust breaking like glass. My body ached that night without the anti-inflammatory pills. But what hurt more was the realization creeping through my chest like cold water. My children wanted me to fail. They wanted me weak, confused, dependent. It would make their decisions easier. I sat in my recliner until dawn, watching shadows move across the ceiling, feeling something sharp and bright crystallizing in my chest. If they wanted to play games with my health, I'd show them what real strategy looked like. And the first test of that resolve came at dinner. Sunday dinner had been our tradition for 15 years. I'd spend all afternoon in the kitchen, stirring beef stew and baking cornbread, setting the good china my mother had passed down. The smell of home cooking usually filled every corner of the house with warmth. This Sunday felt different. I called them to the table 3 times before they wandered in, still laughing about some video on Julian's phone. Their plates sat untouched while they criticized everything. The stew was too greasy for Claire's new diet. The cornbread had too much butter for Naomi's cholesterol concerns. The vegetables were overcooked for Julian's refined palate. I watched them push food around their plates like children avoiding vegetables, their voices bright with plans for after dinner. Plans that didn't include helping me clean up or staying to talk. My hands shook as I cleared the table alone, grease stains on my favorite apron looking like evidence of failure. I scraped their barely touched portions into the garbage, each spoonful feeling like a piece of my heart being discarded. Standing at the sink, I realized I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their inconvenience, their burden, their problem to solve. I whispered to my reflection in the window, "Then I'll stop serving." That night, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to my core. The old house had thin walls and creaky floors that carried sound like gossip through a small town. I'd learned to move quietly after 40 years of marriage, stepping carefully to avoid the squeaky board by the bathroom door. That's how I heard them in the hallway at midnight, their voices low but sharp with planning. "Once she's in Sunset Manor, we can put the house on the market immediately," Julian said, his businessman's voice calculating square footage and market value. "The location alone should get us 400,000, maybe more with some staging." Naomi's laugh was cold. "Finally. I've been looking at condos downtown. My share should cover a nice 2-bedroom with a view. Don't forget we'll need to split 3 ways," Claire added. But it's better than watching her struggle here alone. My chest burned, not from my heart condition, but from betrayal sharper than any medical diagnosis. They weren't planning for my care. They were planning for my disappearance, counting money that wasn't theirs, dividing up my life like vultures over fresh roadkill. I pressed my back against the cool wall, listening to them discuss my future like I was already gone. That's when I started planning too. And the first step was to find a place to record everything. I found the leather journal buried in my desk drawer, beneath old utility bills and grocery store coupons. I'd used it years ago for budgeting when money was tight, and every dollar needed tracking. The pages smelled like vanilla and dust, holding memories of better times. Now it would hold something else entirely. I began documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every rolled eye, every time they forgot to include me in family discussions. I wrote about the missing medications, the dismissive shrugs, the way they talked over me like I was furniture. Writing steadied my shaking hands. It turned pain into evidence, confusion into clarity. Each entry was a small act of rebellion against being erased. Some nights I wrote by lamplight until my arthritis screamed, filling pages with details they'd never suspect I noticed. The way Julian checked his watch during my stories. How Naomi grimaced when I asked for help reaching high shelves. Claire's impatient sighs when I moved too slowly. One night, I ended an entry with a promise that surprised me with its steel. They'll beg to come back.
They just don't know it yet.
The words looked powerful on paper, but to make that promise real, I needed something more concrete than hope. I needed the bank. Tuesday morning, while Julian worked his late shift at the accounting firm, I slipped out to First National Bank. The same building where I'd opened my first checking account as a young bride, where I'd applied for our mortgage, where I'd deposited every paycheck from my years as a school secretary. The lobby smelled like industrial carpet and quiet desperation. I approached the customer service desk with my cane clicking against polished floors, trying to look frail enough to garner sympathy, but sharp enough to handle business. I need to update my account information, I told the clerk, a young woman with kind eyes and practiced patience. Add some beneficiaries, change some access levels. She raised an eyebrow when I explained my specific instructions, but nodded professionally. My children thought my money was theirs by birthright, that blood automatically granted them ownership of my life's work. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I signed documents with steady hands, each signature feeling like armor being forged. When I walked out 30 minutes later, the spring air felt lighter on my shoulders. The next piece of armor came from an unexpected place. The business card had been tucked in my recipe book for 3 years, forgotten between pages for apple pie and pot roast. Harold Weston, attorney at law. He was my neighbor's cousin, the one who'd helped with my divorce papers decades ago when I'd finally left Julian's alcoholic father. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, but my voice came out stronger than expected. Mr. Weston? This is Martha Cunningham. I need to update my will. We met 2 days later in his office above the hardware store, the same cramped space where he'd helped me claim my independence all those years ago. His hair had gone completely gray, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had impressed me. Martha, you sure about this? He asked as his pen scratched across legal documents. This is a significant change from your previous arrangements. I thought about Sunday dinners pushed aside, medications hidden, conversations about my future that excluded my present. I've never been more sure of anything. The will was no longer theirs to claim. But who I chose instead would shock even me. Instead of my children, I named beneficiaries they'd never see coming. The Riverside Public Library, where I'd hidden from loneliness for 30 years, where Mrs. Thompson still saved mystery novels for me behind the circulation desk. The food pantry at St. Matthew's Church, the same place that had fed us when Julian's father lost another job to his drinking. And a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to school, women who reminded me of myself at 25, desperate to build something better for their children. Every line I signed with Harold was a quiet strike back. The house they were already mentally decorating, the savings account they'd calculated down to the penny, the car they'd planned to sell. None of it would touch their greedy hands. I almost laughed imagining their faces when Harold read the will aloud. Naomi's perfectly applied lipstick would smear as her mouth fell open. Julian's businessman confidence would crumble like old concrete. Claire would cry real tears for the first time since childhood, but not from grief. These organizations will put the money to better use than my children would, I told Harold, signing the final page. He nodded solemnly. Sometimes family isn't about blood, Martha. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them. And speaking of showing up, that's exactly what I started doing. The food pantry at St. Matthew's needed volunteers on Tuesday mornings, the same day I used to have physical therapy. I showed up with my cane and my newly sharpened sense of purpose, ready to work despite the arthritis gnawing at my joints. The young mothers there reminded me of myself 30 years ago. Tired eyes, determined chins, children clinging to their legs while they calculated whether they could afford both bread and milk. Mrs. Cunningham, little Tommy Rodriguez said, tugging on my sweater, "Will you read us a story while Mama gets groceries?" I settled into the child care corner, surrounded by faces that lit up when I opened the picture book. These children didn't roll their eyes at my slow pace or check their phones when I spoke. They leaned in closer, hungry for attention and stories. For the first time in months, I felt useful. Needed.
Alive.
The young mothers hugged me when I left, thanked me for listening to their stories, for treating them like human beings instead of charity cases. My chest swelled with something I'd almost forgotten, the warm satisfaction of making a difference. But invisibility was exactly what Naomi counted on when she confronted me the next morning. Naomi stormed into my bedroom at 8 a.m., her real estate agent heels clicking across the hardwood floors like gunshots. She held a manila folder thick with paperwork, her mouth set in the same determined line she'd worn as a child demanding extra cookies. "Why haven't you signed the Sunset Manor application?" she demanded, dropping the folder on my nightstand with dramatic flair. "The waiting list is 6 months long. We need to get you placed before winter." I blinked innocently, pulling my robe tighter. "I wanted more time to think about it, honey. It's a big decision." Her green eyes narrowed, the same eyes that had once sparkled when I pushed her on the playground swing, now cold as winter windows. "Time to think. Mom, you can barely manage your medications. Last week you forgot to eat lunch twice. If you don't sign these papers, we'll have to make decisions for you." The threat hung in the air like smoke. She thought I was confused, helpless, too scattered to notice her manipulation. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I kept my voice level. "I understand your concern, dear. What I didn't say, I understand more than you think. I understand exactly what decisions you've already made." She doesn't know the decisions I've already made either, I thought, watching her straighten the papers with sharp efficiency. Claire bounced into my kitchen the following Saturday, her engagement ring catching the morning light like a tiny disco ball. She'd inherited her father's dramatic gestures and her grandmother's sense of entitlement, a combination that had served her well in her marketing job. "Mom, I have the most exciting news," she gushed, spreading wedding magazines across my kitchen table like tarot cards predicting an expensive future. Brandon and I set the date, June 15th at the Riverside Country Club. I poured her coffee in the mug she'd made in third-grade pottery class, the one with crooked handles and uneven glaze that I'd treasured for 20 years. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. The thing is," she continued, not meeting my eyes, "the reception venue costs more than we budgeted. I was hoping you might want to contribute. You know, as mother of the bride." I set down my own coffee carefully. "What if I don't have anything left to contribute?" Claire laughed, the sound bright and dismissive. "Mom, don't be silly. You've got the house, your savings, Dad's life insurance money. Don't worry, we'll use it all smartly when the time comes." My smile felt frozen on my face. When the time comes. Not if. When. Little did she know, the house had already slipped from their grasp like water through desperate fingers. And soon, I'd be forced to face their coordinated ultimatum. They invited me to dinner at Antonio's, the Italian restaurant where we used to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries. I should have known something was wrong when they all arrived together, their faces wearing matching expressions of false cheerfulness. We ordered wine and antipasto, made small talk about the weather and Claire's wedding plans. But halfway through the main course, Julian set down his fork and leaned forward with his serious businessman face. "Mom, we've been talking and we think it's time you moved to Sunset Manor. We've already put down a deposit." Naomi nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "The facility is beautiful, and you'll have so much help there. No more worrying about medications or cooking or cleaning." Claire reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We'll handle all your things, sort through what you want to keep." My fork clattered against a plate, my chicken parmesan suddenly tasting like cardboard and defeat. They'd orchestrated this perfectly, a public place where I couldn't make a scene, their united front presenting my removal as inevitable. But they had no clue that the ground beneath their perfectly laid plans was already shifting like earthquake fault lines. Because someone new was about to enter my life and change everything. The Riverside Public Library had been my sanctuary since I was 12 years old, checking out Nancy Drew mysteries and dreaming of adventures beyond my small town. Now, at 73, I still found comfort in the familiar smell of old paper and quiet whispers. That's where I met Evelyn Bishop on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She was sitting in my usual chair by the large windows, reading a thick biography and laughing softly at something on the page. "Excuse me," I said politely, "but that's usually where I sit." Instead of moving, she patted the empty chair beside her. "Plenty of room for two book lovers."
I'm Evelyn.
"Just moved here from Portland to be closer to my grandson." She was my age but carried herself differently, straight shoulders, bright scarves, eyes that sparkled with mischief instead of defeat. We spent 2 hours talking about books, travel, and the way people underestimate older women. "You know," she said as we prepared to leave, "there's a wonderful community center on Oak Street. Seniors who actually live instead of just existing. You should come with me next week." For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of possibility. I wasn't doomed to isolation and nursing home meals. I was building a new circle, one my children would never be able to touch or control. Julian had always been a snooper, even as a child. I'd catch him reading my diary, listening at doors, searching through drawers when he thought I wasn't looking. Some habits never change, and I was counting on that weakness. I left an old checkbook in the kitchen drawer where I kept grocery store coupons and expired warranties, the place he'd search first if he wanted to assess my finances. But this checkbook was special. I filled it with fake deposit slips and handwritten notes about life savings transferred to security box and emergency cash hidden in-house. I even wrote myself a reminder. "Don't forget," told Harold to keep inheritance details secret until after funeral. Within 3 days, I noticed pages missing from the checkbook. Torn carefully, but not carefully enough to fool someone who'd raised 3 children and knew every trick in the book. Julian thought he was being clever, gathering intelligence for their campaign to prove my incompetence. I thought, wait until he realizes he's been chasing shadows and smoke, following a trail that leads absolutely nowhere. But before that game could play out completely, my own body betrayed me in the most ironic way possible. I was making coffee Tuesday morning, the same routine I'd followed for 50 years, when the world tilted sideways. The kitchen floor rushed up to meet me, my coffee mug shattering against the linoleum in a spray of ceramic and caffeine. For a moment, I lay there listening to my heart hammering irregular rhythms, wondering if this was how it would end, not with dignity on my own terms, but sprawled on my kitchen floor like a broken doll. My children arrived within minutes of the ambulance, their faces pale, with what looked like genuine concern for the first time in months. At the hospital, they hovered around my bed, speaking in hushed tones to doctors about my condition and prognosis. But through the medication haze, I heard Julian mutter to Naomi in the hallway, "This might actually be it. We should be prepared." They thought my collapse was the beginning of the end, that death was finally solving their problem for them. The irony was delicious. Here they were, playing concerned children while secretly celebrating my weakness. If only they knew that while my body was failing, my plan was stronger than ever, backed by legal documents they'd never see coming. And I was about to seal that plan with a single, devastating signature. The discharge forms seemed endless: medication schedules, follow-up appointments, emergency contact information. When the nurse reached the emergency contact section, she looked up expectantly. "Who should we list as your primary contact, Mrs. Cunningham?" Without hesitation, I said, "Evelyn Bishop," and rattled off her phone number. Naomi's jaw dropped. Julian stepped forward, his voice sharp with indignation. "That's a mistake. We're her children. We should be the emergency contacts." But the nurse was already writing Evelyn's information in careful block letters, and I was signing my name with surprisingly steady hands. "I'm perfectly capable of choosing my own emergency contact," I said calmly, meeting each of their shocked stares. "Evelyn actually answers her phone when I need help." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. For the first time in years, I had made a choice that put my needs first, and they could feel their control slipping away like sand through their fingers. Claire opened her mouth to protest, but I was already being wheeled toward the exit, leaving them standing in the hospital corridor trying to process this first crack in their carefully constructed plans. Next, I decided to lock them out in the most literal way possible. Tuesday morning, while my children were at work assuming I was resting quietly, I called Morrison's locksmith. Ted Morrison had installed my locks 15 years ago, when the neighborhood had a string of break-ins. Now his son Billy was taking over the business. "Need all the locks changed," I told Billy when he arrived.
Front door, back door, basement door.
New keys, different from the old ones. Billy was professional enough not to ask questions, but I could see curiosity in his eyes as he worked. Most people changed locks after a divorce or a break-in, not as a preemptive strike against their own children. The sound of his drill felt like freedom being installed one screw at a time. Wednesday afternoon, Naomi tried to use her key for her usual unannounced visit. I watched from my living room window as she stood on the porch, jamming the key into the lock repeatedly, her face flushing red with frustration and confusion. She banged on the door, demanding an explanation, her voice shrill with indignation. I simply turned up the radio, the oldies station playing songs from when children still respected their parents, and returned to writing in my leather journal. Each entry was becoming more detailed, more damning, more satisfying. The next explosion came from Claire, and it was spectacular. Claire's phone call came at 7 a.m. Thursday, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "What the hell, Mom? Naomi couldn't get into the house yesterday, and now my key doesn't work either. What are you trying to prove?" I settled into my recliner with my morning coffee, savoring both the caffeine and her desperation. "I'm proving that it's my house, sweetheart. I can change the locks if I want to." "This is insane. You're picking strangers over your own family." The word family hung in the air like a bad joke. I almost laughed at the irony. She was accusing me of abandoning family, while she and her siblings plotted to warehouse me in a nursing home. Family doesn't steal medications, Claire. Family doesn't whisper about selling your home while you're still living in it. You're being paranoid and dramatic. We're trying to help you. Help me what? Disappear? She sputtered for a moment before finding her ammunition. "You'll regret this, Mom. When something happens to you and you need us, remember this conversation." But I knew the truth was exactly opposite. When they finally realized what they'd lost, when the inheritance they'd been counting on vanished like morning mist, they'd be the ones with regrets. I was about to plant the bait that would drive them to complete desperation. The envelope looked innocent enough, cream-colored stationery with my children, written in my careful handwriting. I left it on the kitchen counter where Julian would find it during one of his checking on Mom visits, which had become more frequent since the locksmith incident. Inside, I'd written a short note that I knew would haunt their dreams. "You thought I was powerless. You thought I was confused and helpless. You'll learn soon enough what powerless really means. Some secrets die with people. Others live on in documents you'll never see coming. Remember that." I signed it simply, Mother. Wednesday evening, I returned from dinner with Evelyn to find the envelope gone and Julian's car speeding away from my driveway.
Perfect.
Let them stew in their anxiety. Let them wonder what documents I'd been signing, what secrets I'd been keeping. The beauty of revenge is that sometimes the anticipation is more devastating than the actual blow. And Naomi's next move would expose their desperation to everyone who mattered. Friday morning brought unexpected entertainment. Harold Weston called, chuckling softly into the phone. "Martha, I just had the most interesting conversation with someone claiming to be you, asking about your will and estate planning." "Really? What did this person sound like?" Young woman, very aggressive, insisted she had power of attorney and needed immediate access to your documents. When I asked for verification, she hung up quickly. Naomi. Of course. She'd always been the most direct of my children, the one who charged ahead when subtlety failed. Now she was making frantic phone calls, trying to find out what legal landmines I'd planted in their path to my money. "I told her everything was sealed per your instructions," Harold continued, "and that any inquiries would need to come through you personally." "Thank you, Harold. Keep everything locked down tight." They were scrambling now, desperate to regain control of a situation that had slipped completely from their grasp. Every frantic move they made only tightened the trap I'd built around their greed. And soon, the whole town would know exactly what kind of children they were. St. Matthew's Church had been my spiritual home for 40 years, through marriages and divorces, births and funerals, celebrations and sorrows. The congregation knew my children well, had watched them grow up in these pews, had celebrated their graduations and achievements. Now they were watching something else entirely. Sunday morning, whispers floated through the fellowship hall like incense. Naomi had been making phone calls, asking longtime church members about my mental state and whether anyone had witnessed me acting confused or erratic. Mrs. Henderson, who'd known me since I was 25, pulled me aside after service. "Martha, dear, I hope you know that several people have been asking strange questions about you. Very inappropriate questions about your finances and decision-making ability." The congregation's reaction was swift and decisive. Cold stares followed Naomi to her usual pew. Conversations stopped when she approached. The same people who'd praised her children at church potlucks now saw her through different eyes, as the ungrateful daughter harassing their beloved church secretary. My private battle had turned into her public shame, and I hadn't needed to say a single word against her. But the battle was about to come straight to my doorstep in the most humiliating way possible. Thursday afternoon brought Julian and a stranger in an expensive suit to my front door. The woman carried a clipboard and wore the professional smile of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Mrs. Cunningham? I'm Rebecca Walsh from Premier Properties. Your son Julian called about doing a market evaluation of your home." Julian stood behind her, trying to look authoritative and concerned. "Just a routine assessment, Mom, for insurance purposes." I stepped into the doorway with my cane, blocking their entrance. After 50 years of being pushed around, I'd learned the power of taking up space. This home is not for sale. It's not being assessed. It's not available for inspection. Julian's face flushed red. "Mom, be reasonable. We just need to. You need to leave. Both of you." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, realizing she'd been pulled into a family drama that was about to explode on my front porch. "Perhaps this isn't the best time," she murmured, backing toward her car. "It's never going to be the right time," I said clearly, making sure my voice carried to Mrs. Patterson's garden next door, where she was pretending to water her roses while listening to every word. "This house is not yours to sell." Julian's professional mask finally cracked. "We'll see about that," he snapped before stalking after the retreating realtor. I knew exactly how to deliver my final devastating blow. Sunday dinner. One last time. I sent each of them a handwritten invitation on my best stationery. "Please join me for dinner this Sunday at 4 p.m. I have something important to discuss regarding our family's future." They arrived together, probably having planned their strategy in Julian's car. Their faces wore careful expressions of concern mixed with anticipation. They thought I was finally ready to surrender. I served beef stew, the same meal they'd once mocked and pushed around their plates. But this time, they ate with nervous enthusiasm, trying to butter me up for whatever capitulation they expected. After we'd finished eating, I folded my hands and looked at each of their faces. Faces I'd loved and worried over and sacrificed for during 30 years of motherhood. I wanted you all here together when I shared my news. Every dollar in my accounts, every brick of this house, every stick of furniture, it's all been promised to other people. Organizations that will use the money to help others instead of just themselves. Their forks froze midway to their mouths. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. None of it is yours. None of it was ever yours. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. Naomi shrieked like she'd been stabbed, her carefully applied makeup running in streams down her cheeks. You can't do this to us. We're your children. Julian jumped up, so fast his chair fell over backward. You're mentally incompetent. This is elder abuse in reverse. No court will uphold this. Claire just cried, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You betrayed us, Naomi screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. We trusted you. I sat calmly in my chair, hands steady for the first time in months, watching them fall apart like cheap furniture. Their true selves were finally showing, not the concerned children they'd pretended to be, but greedy strangers who'd seen me as nothing but a source of future income. I betrayed you? My voice was quiet, but it cut through their hysteria. You planned to put me in a nursing home so you could sell my house. You hid my medications. You dismissed my feelings and ignored my needs. You betrayed me first. Julian stormed toward the door, Claire stumbling behind him, still sobbing. Naomi lingered long enough to hiss, "You'll die alone and forgotten." I smiled sadly. I'd rather die alone than live as your burden. Tonight, I sit in my recliner with my leather journal, writing what I know will be my final entry in this particular story. The house is quiet except for the grandfather clock and the settling sounds of a home that's truly mine. My children left 3 hours ago, their voices echoing through the neighborhood as they argued in Julian's car. By now, they've probably called lawyers, researched my rights, planned their next attack. But Harold's documents are ironclad, and my mind is clearer than it's been in years. Tomorrow, Evelyn and I are visiting the community center. Next week, I start a new volunteer position reading to children at the library. My days will be filled with people who value my stories, my time, my presence. The money they thought was theirs will help single mothers get educations, will feed hungry families, will buy books for children who dream of adventures beyond their circumstances. They thought I was powerless, confused, easily manipulated. They learned too late that underestimating someone is the quickest way to lose everything. I closed the journal and set it on the table beside me. My story isn't over. It's just beginning. For the first time in years, I get to write the next chapter myself. Still, I can't help but wonder, when they finally swallow their pride and come back knocking, what will I say? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Feminine Revenge has got more thrilling stories for you.